All right, buddy, welcome to the show. Today, I have a tremendous one for you. So we have the reaction to Donald Trump inevitably being indicted, potentially arrested, and there's some wacky takes out there, man. There's some wacky takes. So I'll cover that. Also, Jon Stewart versus Larry Summers. That got a lot of play online because Larry Summers is one of the worst single actors to help get us into the current economic situation we're in. This is the guy who was behind the various deregulation plots. I mean, we're talking about getting rid of Glass-Steagall, and he influenced many Democratic presidents into becoming more and more right-wing. So Jon Stewart takes him to task, and it was glorious. We'll talk about that. And then later on, we have absolute chaos raging in France, and what's likely to happen from here. But suffice to say, the French people don't take any garbage. The French people stand up to their government rather aggressively. And then Bill Maher confronts Andrew Yang to his face in a pretty aggressive way. And dare I say this is a rare instance of based Bill Maher making a return? I think it is. And we're also going to have some fun laughing at Kamala. I got that and much more. By the way, quick little shameless plug. We are so close to 1 million subs. As I said the other day, I could taste it. We're right there, man. Un poquito. Un poquito. We're so close. So do me a favor, click that subscribe button. And, I mean, we're going to do a celebratory stream, and it's going to have to be soon. I mean, I'm not saying anything for sure on the record, but potentially, maybe, it'll be this Thursday at around 2 o'clock, maybe. Maybe that's when we'll have a celebratory stream. Anyway, click the subscribe button, help get us closer. All right, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it. So, Jon Stewart interviewed Larry Summers. I seriously do not understand how, at this late date, these absolute establishment ghouls are agreeing to do interviews with Jon Stewart. I don't get it. I'll never get it. It makes no sense to me. Because every time Jon talks to one of these people, he busts them up. He makes them look idiotic. And then they're still like, sure, I'll do an interview with him. He's like the only person who still has, you know, some outsider credibility who's able to sit down one-on-one with these sorts of people. So, big mistake here from Larry Summers. By the way, the sense you get from this clip is he is not used to hearing any pushback on his ideas. That he really thinks like he's got it all figured out and nobody intelligent disagrees. And Jon Stewart's going to show him that that's not exactly true. So let's watch and we'll break it down as we go here.
Massive stimulus and an economy that could only produce so much. We had huge levels of demand, and those huge levels of demand kept pushing up prices and pushing up wages. But ultimately, it was you put too much water in the bathtub overflows. You put too much demand into the economy, and you get high and rising prices.
So let me just pause to decode that for you. What he's saying is, hey, man, we cut a stimulus check to workers, to average Americans, and that is what's leading to inflation. That's the argument that he's making. Now, that happens to be total garbage, but he's asserting it rather confidently, so Jon Stewart's going to respond.
Cisco Fed says that is, demand is maybe 30 to 35% of the inflation. Wages are really around 20% of the inflation. There's a huge corporate profit aspect to it. There's a huge supply chain aspect to it. But our method for controlling it seems really much more focused on wages and employment.
There's certain sicknesses you...
So again, just to break that down for you, Jon Stewart is saying, in his Jon Stewart way, you're blaming regular people, you're missing an entire part of the picture, the majority of the picture, where it's not the fault of regular people. Anyway, all right, keep going.
Seems really much more focused on wages and employment.
There's certain sicknesses you can have where there's a drug and it has side effects. And everybody hates the side effects, and no doctor wants their patient to suffer the side effects. But if you don't address the sickness, you're going to have a bigger problem down the road.
But the stop.
So he's saying, again, I just got to decode this from you, away from Larry Summers speak and to regular speak. He's saying the medicine is raising interest rates, and the side effect is, yeah, you're going to have 2 million to 4 million people who are unemployed. So you're going to really, really hurt average Americans who didn't do anything wrong. And he's saying, well, you know, it's a necessary thing. You got to take the medicine, right?
Market assets have gone up 150%. CEO pay has gone up 1,500%. Workers' wages haven't gone up at all. I think you're misdiagnosing the sickness.
First, John, inequality is a terrible thing. The most serious problem the American economy has been the cleavages between those like you and me who are very fortunate. That's why we need a strategy of strengthening labor power in the economy. The question, though,
by the way, every single policy he's ever proposed has crushed labor power. What he's calling for right now is to crush labor power. He wants to kick millions and millions of workers out of a job. It's amazing he says that with a straight face.
Is it an issue that somebody whose control is over setting interest rates and printing money can do much about? Now, you could say that they shouldn't have...
So to decode that, he's saying, look, the Fed only has one blunt tool. The Fed's tool is to raise interest rates. If you want to say, hey, maybe we don't address this through the Fed, we address it through other means, that's a fair point. And Jon Stewart's like, yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. We need a Congress to work for the people. That's what we need Congress to take over and do their job.
Funded to the 2009 recession
by
cutting money, by cutting interest rates. You could say that.
Yes,
but
you could.
Do you really think, and certainly that wasn't what progressives were saying at that time.
It doesn't matter.
At that time, progressives were saying, we need lower interest rates so people can borrow money to buy houses and put people to work.
But they were
lower
stimulating
interest rates
it
for car
at
loans.
the corporate level, where they just put the money in the hands of the bankers and say, you decide. This pandemic was the first time the government, in my opinion, did the thing that they're supposed to do in a crisis. When you look at the stimulus payments that went out, 70% of it was being used for rent and food. And if you look at the recovery in the pandemic versus the recovery from 2008, when you stimulated the economy at the demand level, jobs had plunged in the pandemic, and then they shot back up. The recovery in 2009 was painstaking, but the stock market did great. So our fiscal policy and our monetary policy has always been on the side of corporate easing.
Just so we're...
So to explain what he said again in layman's terms, the bailouts in 2008, 2009, they just handed money over to the bankers, to the top 1%. And those guys argued, oh yeah, bro, this will trickle down to our workers and stuff. So that's cool. So yeah, just give us all the money, give us all the money, give us all the money. And that's what Obama did. And it didn't trickle down. And the recovery was really long and painful. And what Jon Stewart is saying is that during the pandemic, a higher percentage of the money actually went to regular people. And that was a better thing. But Larry Summers now looks at a situation where, for example, the unemployment rate has dropped massively and workers have some leverage and some bargaining power. And Larry Summers looks at that and goes, no, that's a problem we immediately need to fix. And the solution is to jack up interest rates and kick millions of them onto the unemployment rolls. And so Jon Stewart will keep breaking this down for you, but the point he's trying to make is Larry Summers and his ilk, they were in favor of bailouts that served the corporate class, and now we have a situation where at least some percentage of the money went to regular people, and he's like, whoa, now this is a real big problem.
Clear. If you talk to African-American voters, if you talk to Hispanic voters, talk to voters who don't have college degrees, they regard the country's biggest problem as having to do with inflation. Mm-hmm. So while you may see this as having been tremendously successful, our fellow Americans who don't live as comfortably as you and I do have a lot of questions, John, about what's happened. And it's not hard to understand why they have a lot of questions in light of what's happened to their purchasing power.
But you're suggesting their purchasing power.
We took a good idea and overdid it.
I disagree.
By providing for too much inflation.
But what you're not addressing is not all of inflation was stimulus. The tools that we have, though, are basically saying to somebody, everyone's paying more for gas and groceries, and that's really hard. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to throw 10 million of them out of work so that we all don't have to share that burden. Why aren't we attacking corporate profit in any way? Because that's been estimated to be 30% of inflation, 40% of inflation.
Matt Stoller had that at like 50 or 60%, if I remember correctly. So, because what happened was you had this narrative of like inflation take hold in the media, and then corporations were like, hey, we have an opportunity here. We could jack prices up on everything, even if it's not actually impacted by inflation, because we can get away with it. Because now you have the narrative of inflation that's taken over. And that's exactly what they did. Business Insider had a number of articles explaining here are the different corporations, here's exactly what they're doing. They're basically jacking up prices just because they can get away with it. And so how would you fix the problem if the problem is brought about by corporate profits, corporate greed, monopolization, windfall profits tax. You would do a windfall profits tax. Now that's a way to try to reduce inflation where you're actually going after the bad actors, where you're going after the corporate pirates. But that's something Larry Summers has never considered and would never agree to do. Why? Because those are his buddies. The corporate class are his buddies. Remember when he was calling for higher unemployment from some tropical paradise in the Bahamas, casually saying it? I mean, that's who we're dealing with here. So he refuses to accept the fact that perhaps the majority of inflation is brought about by corporate profits, monopolization, and issues with the supply chain, which are left over from the pandemic. He refuses to respond to that. He refuses to acknowledge that. He refuses to even make an argument against it. He just keeps asserting, no, it's the one-time stimulus check we gave to people who desperately needed help. It's a really perverse way of looking at the situation.
I think it's a tenable view that all of a sudden corporations became greedy. Of course, there's monopolies in the economy, John, and we should be for
They've been
much
bragging
more
about
aggressive,
it on
much
their
more
earnings
aggressive
calls.
than we were.
On their earnings calls, they're saying our profits have never been higher. We're killing it. The markups during the pandemic are sometimes they're saying 70% of what they were.
If there was a huge
Inarguable. He's got you, Larry. He's got you in a chokehold. There's no way out of this.
increase in the demand for shrewd television commentary, I imagine the demand for what you do would go way up. And I imagine you convert that into higher wages and getting more and getting paid better.
You're saying it's the market at work.
I don't think you call yourself a gouger when you.
I would absolutely call myself a gouger.
When you did that.
And by the way, the effect of the talk show business is very different than the effect of ExxonMobil, right? I mean, let's be fair.
Isn't the show going to be on Apple TV?
Correct.
And I think Apple TV is worth about 5 times as much as Exxon. I think Apple's price, since the stimulus began, Apple's value has gone up by about $1.2 trillion.
Right.
That's $4,000 for every American, just an increase in the value of Apple.
You just made my point for me.
Do you feel that Apple is somehow gouging or doing something wrong?
Yes, of course. And Exxon is.
Look at his face. Look at his face, man. He's like, oh man, that was my finishing move. And he just casually got back up after I did it. Oh, Larry Summers, you're punching above your weight, dog.
Okay, so let's talk about Apple. Let's talk about Apple. Do you think Apple should just sell phones for less and not have enough phones? What would you have Apple do?
You're saying to me, John, market forces are market forces. And if demand goes up, are you suggesting, young man, that Apple should charge less than they could charge? Let me flip that on you. When there's a tightness in the labor market, what you're saying is the workers shouldn't do the same. That the workers, just following the same capitalistic principles that allow Apple to charge more for their phones, shouldn't charge more because wage inflation is driving inflation.
That's not at all what I'm saying.
God, he's obliterating him so bad, man. Oh, this is hard to watch now.
That's exactly what you're saying.
Actually, it isn't. Every worker should get as high a wage as they can. It would be a terrible idea.
But the Fed is going to intervene. The Fed is going to intervene to make that not possible.
No.
And that's what you're calling for, Larry Summers. That's what you want. How do you not see it? It's plain as day. You are deeply, deeply anti-worker and pro-corporate class. You mask it in all this faux intellectual jargon, like this is the only way out of this thing. But it's not true. It's not true. Perhaps you've convinced yourself of it, but it's not true, and you're being exposed in front of the world right now.
The Fed is intervening to control the overall level of demand growth.
And what will that do to the labor market?
Much faster.
What will that do to the labor market? What will it do to the labor market? It will loosen
is likely to lead to
looser labor markets.
A somewhat looser labor market.
Exactly.
We hope to minimize that consequence.
No, you don't. The whole point is to not minimize the consequences. He's such a little weasel boy. Oh my God, Larry, give it a rest, dog. Give it a rest. Look, he's being unmasked. Larry Summers was one of the key figures behind the neoliberalization of our economy. He's one of the key figures behind getting Democrats to embrace a more right-wing ideology. And he's like the face of corporatism. He is. He's in favor of deregulation, deregulation, deregulation. And it's this idea, this argument of like, hey, hands off of the free market. It's sort of a market fundamentalist idea, unless and until things go south, and then it's intervene on behalf of the wealthy, intervene on behalf of the corporations, and bail them out. And every step of the way, it's snubbing workers. So Jon Stewart really did a fantastic job here busting them up. Again, the sense I get from this clip is that Larry Summers is not used to hearing any pushback on his ideas at all. At all. And now you finally have somebody making obvious counterpoints, and he's like... Honestly, pretty glorious to see. Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.